proceed with the examination of Dr. Sanjay Gulati. If defense counsel could introduce herself, and then when you're ready, proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Marissa Elkins for the defense. Dr. Gulati, you've already been sworn in as a witness, so we'll just begin with questioning. Can you please explain to the court introduce yourself to the court and tell the court a little bit about your credentials and your expertise?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Sanjay Gulati, G-U-L-A-T-I. I work at Harvard Medical School. I specialize in child psychiatry, but I do work with deaf individuals of all ages.
And are you familiar with an individual by the name of Jolly Patel?
Yes, I do.
And how do you know Ms. Patel?
So she was referred to me. I did a psych evaluation with her. We actually had quite a long meeting. We had this meeting with the assistance of a certified deaf interpreter.
And were you specifically asked to evaluate Ms. Patel on the issue of whether or not she was competent to stand trial?
So the primary purpose of the evaluation was in regards to mental illness and doing an evaluation in regards to that. And then the second reason was, yes, the competency.
If you could please just tell the court and explain how you conducted the evaluation and your findings.
So I began that evaluation with reviewing Jolly's records, which were quite complete, and in those records were the police report and some of her history.
And it was very nice of you to have provided all that information.
And in evaluating, did your evaluation include speaking directly with Ms. Patel?
I did attempt, but unfortunately it wasn't very successful. After that such attempt, I did ask for the assistance of a certified deaf interpreter.
Right. As a result, through these evaluations and review of the records, were you able to make any findings regarding Ms. Patel, regarding her understanding of the nature of the proceedings or her ability to assist counsel at trial?
So in my examination of Ms. Patel's psychiatric illnesses, I was able to diagnose her with intermittent explosive disorder as well as language deprivation syndrome, which is LDS.
I'd like to talk more specifically about language deprivation syndrome. I'll get it out. Can you please tell the court in general a little bit about language deprivation syndrome and how it manifests and its symptoms?
So, sure, that is actually my area of expertise. Early in my career, I realized that that particular language deprivation syndrome was hard to evaluate. And I began to realize that psychiatric illnesses manifest differently when someone has language deprivation or they do not, and if they're fluent in a language or not. So in beginning my research, I realized that deaf children who do not have language early on, it becomes a problem for them later on in life. It may manifest itself in a number of ways. And so this was the impetus of my research and further study. And mind you, the core concept or understanding of language deprivation isn't necessarily new within the deaf community, but it is certainly new to the medical community and to the legal community. But like I said, it's not necessarily new to the deaf community. And so I've been able to bring it to the forefront.
And how is, how would you describe some of the defining symptoms or manifestations of language deprivation syndrome?
So mind you, the research in regards to LDS is ongoing, particularly for myself, and those symptoms are, I'm still developing what manifests as symptoms, but one of the symptoms, and particularly to the untrained eye, is that a person may look like they are fluent in signing because they are producing some sort of signs, but it's not necessarily sign language. And if such person who may not be fluent in sign language were to meet someone else who was fluent in the language, that person who has this fluency would notice it right off the bat. They may call that person, they may say they have low language capabilities or something of the sort. And however, from a scientific perspective, it is clearly important for us to really discriminate what is it that makes it different and identify those things that do make it different.
So in your research, what are those things that make it different?
So language deprivation is a syndrome. And so it's not only about the language piece. Surely the language piece is important, which is one of the reasons I brought in the CDI when I was meeting with Ms. Patel, because the language piece is vital and it's something that I do look at, but it also manifests itself in other ways that unfortunately impact the individual's development as they are aging.
So it's a variety or a group of symptoms put together that create the syndrome.
Could you list those symptoms?
So an exact list of those symptoms is difficult, because imagine even for yourself as a small child learning language, you may not necessarily remember when you did learn language because you were exposed within your environment to language all the time.
And it seemed automatic, the acquisition, it seemed simple. So for example, if a baby were able to communicate with their parents and use the sign for milk, and the concept was then developed that milk is something that's desired, they could then make the connection between the desire for the milk, the concept, the sign for the milk, and the fact that the milk was actually then produced or brought to them by one of their parents. But if there's no language there, if it's not based on the word first, then there's no ability to develop the concept of the milk.
And the traditional school of thought is that a child, unbeknownst to them, probably already has some type of thought, and they want the thing, or they need the thing, and then the word teaches them what they have already been thinking, where I actually see it as the complete opposite. My research and my work is about there is something external that is taught to the child, and then the child is able to think about that and wish for that, or want for that, or ask for that, and communicate about that particular thing. Can I keep going? Would that be all right, Attorney Elkins?
Let me follow up with a question. So you have, in the course of your evaluation, diagnosed Ms. Patel with language deprivation syndrome. What are Ms. Patel's specific symptoms?
May I give a little more background to the court first before I explain the symptoms?
Sure, briefly. We are, however, running a little low on time.
Thank you. So for most people, the ability to learn a language, which very specifically includes grammar, closes at about the age of 7. So between 4, 5, 6, and 7, that window of acquisition is closing. What's important here is that most people assume that language is just a list of vocabulary words, where it's not. It's also the grammar that goes with it. And so the grammar is the ability to use those words. That's what the language is. And so Ms. Patel's symptoms might actually fit with this in such a way that without that grammar, time, cause and effect, things like that actually go missing. A lack of understanding about the concept of right and wrong, making mistakes and not understanding consequences. Understanding that other people might have a different wish or desire than I have in my own mind, and also then making mistakes around those assumptions. And so for Ms. Patel, because of the LDS, life is constructed in such a way where these mistakes happen due to misunderstandings of what other people want, what other people think, what other people need, compared to herself.
So, Dr. Gulati, can you
For the
speak?
interpreters, we just need another moment, please. Thank you.
Dr. Gulati, can you explain to the court how the LDS might affect Ms. Patel's ability to interact and work with counsel and assist in her own defense?
In my opinion, her LDS is serious enough, severe enough, that she's not able to be competent to participate in her own legal defense.
And particularly, Ms. Patel is not able to assist in her own defense nor work with you as her attorney, because I do not believe that Ms. Patel has enough competence to understand guilt or innocence and those types of things that stem from rational types of thinking.
And would the LDS make it difficult for Ms. Patel to explain to counsel a narrative of the events and anything that might have happened to her related to the charges against her?
And Your Honor, the witness is giving the deaf interpreters an opportunity to interpret the question.
Thank you.
And definitely, in my experience working with Ms. Patel, she's incapable of coming up with a sequence, what happens first, second, and third, in any sort of a narrative.
Briefly, I want to ask you about, do you think that the LDS affects Ms. Patel's ability to understand the charges against her and all of the various roles of the people involved in the courtroom?
The idea of a role is considered an abstract concept, and I do not believe that Ms. Patel is capable of understanding the roles of the people and participants in the courtroom. For example, Ms. Patel believes that a person in a blue uniform has some sort of a function, but doesn't necessarily know that they might be a police officer and anything more than the simple idea of putting this sort of a metal bracelet around her wrists, not understanding the concepts of what that means, the arrest.
So my final question to you, do you believe that any of the issues that you discussed regarding Ms. Patel, the inability to goals or to help assist in a narrative, help her attorney understand a narrative, do you think any of those things could be remedied over time with education and counseling?
It's my professional opinion that in this particular circumstance, Ms. Patel may go on, like many others do, to increase a list of vocabulary related to the words around the court proceedings, but without the grammar, without the ability to have abstract thought, without the ability to understand concepts and roles and functions, she would not be able to participate in her own defense and be competent to stand trial.
Thank you. No further questions.
We're going to take a brief recess at this point. How long ready to proceed with cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, at your convenience, you may.
Good afternoon, Dr. Galati. When did you meet Ms. Patel to perform her evaluation?
Misinterpreted. 1 month ago, we met for 3 hours with a certified deaf interpreter for the purpose of her evaluation.
You did not meet with her more than once?
No, because for the purposes of this particular evaluation, the LDS diagnosis was quite evident. If somebody had a secondary diagnosis, for example, bipolar disorder, that might have created a need for more time and a longer process.
So it's your testimony that there were no other diagnoses made other than the language deprivation syndrome at the time that you met with Ms. Patel?
I apologize if that wasn't clear. There are actually 2 diagnoses. In addition to the LDS, intermittent explosive disorder. In my professional opinion, the intermittent explosive disorder came as a result of the LDS. So that's actually the primary diagnosis and the focus of my work. So that's really the one that I gave my emphasis to.
Isn't the LDS hard to evaluate?
In Ms. Patel's specific situation, because she moved here from India at the age of 7, the language acquisition window was pretty much closed. As I had mentioned previously in my testimony, for most people, the window of language acquisition closes at about the age of 7. So had somebody been exposed to language beginning at about the age of 2, then it probably wouldn't have been as challenging based on, sorry, I misinterpreted. If somebody had language acquisition beginning at the age of 2, it might not have been as easy for me to diagnose it quickly. But because of Ms. Patel's situation, it was very evident.
You testified earlier that you received some records and history from the defense counsel, from Ms. Patel's lawyer. What specific records and history did you receive?
Just to be clear, regardless of which entity is hiring me for my services, prosecution or defense, my position is a neutral one. So the records that I happen to receive very specifically, I don't pick and choose what those records are. I look at them in their totality. For Ms. Patel's situation, I received records, for example, her police report regarding very specifically what happened with this incident. I also received her past psychiatric report, her educational history, and her legal history.
Did you pursue any other sources of information other than those, that which was provided by the defense counsel?
Specifically relating to Ms. Patel and this case, no, I did not pursue any other direct information. Keep in mind though, because of the work that I do have resources that I refer to as far as any psychiatric diagnoses or language deprivation syndrome. And I refer to those as needed.
Did you do any independent investigation of the facts that you relied on to form your opinion regarding Ms. Patel's competency?
In the event that there's any chance that somebody has LDS, an evaluation done by another professional practitioner who's not taking into consideration the LDS, who thinks that just because they know some sign language and can communicate with somebody, that that's enough of a foundation to make a professional determination about competency, that's not necessarily an evaluation that I would take seriously in my overall decision. So I'm not aware of any other competency evaluations that were done prior to mine regarding Ms. Patel.
With respect to your consideration of Ms. Patel's competency, did you contact her current therapist?
Unfortunately, as I said before, people with severe LDS can show some improvement when it comes to vocabulary, but not when it comes to abstract thinking or concepts. And I did not reach out to Ms. Patel's current therapist.
Are you familiar with the DSM?
Yes, that's actually a standard publication that psychiatrists use to reference when making a psychiatric evaluation or diagnosis.
Is it a publication which recognizes syndromes or defines a particular syndrome?
worldwide usage of a reference material called the International Classification of Diseases is a reference that does actually include LDS often in its description of syndromes and diagnoses. Our American, very specific DSM does not actually publish to the same degree as the ICD. So LDS is not listed in the DSM in the same way.
Have you testified in other courts regarding the LDS?
Yes, several times.
Do you know if LDS has wide recognition in this country?
It actually depends on who you ask. As far as people involved closely with the deaf community, they absolutely have an awareness of the symptoms and results of LDS. They might not necessarily call it the same thing. They might phrase it as low language usage or something similar. When you speak to the medical professionals, our doctors, they really don't have an understanding or a full knowledge of LDS.
In August of 2009, you wrote an article for the psychiatryonline.org, Psychiatrics News, American Psychiatric Association, correct?
Yes, I did.
And in that article, you said, quote, "My current project is to seek wider recognition of the syndrome of language deprivation." Correct?
Yes, that's correct. And then I realized what I was up against, and I needed to do more research. And so in doing more research, I'm now able to actually go out there and present more.
And in your opinion, would a person with LDS ever be competent to stand trial?
Again, that depends on, in my opinion, the severity of the LDS. So there's one factor that we have not yet discussed today in court, and that's called theory of mind. Another way of saying that is TOM. And so if somebody in particular has no TOM or theory of mind, then it's my opinion that they will never be able to be fully competent to stand trial. May I say something else?
So the witness is indicating, he has said, I believe my explanation was not clear because what I have seen from the definition, from the deaf interpreters is not what I said. Is not what I testified to.
So Doctor, I would just ask you to concentrate on the question and your answer and let the interpreters worry about the interpretive process.
And doctor, finally,
Of course, Your Honor.
and doctor, finally, you would agree that LDS is new to the legal community, that research is ongoing, and that there are no exact lists of symptoms of LDS, correct?
And yes, there's a lot of research that's still being done. For example, Dr. Neil Glickman has produced a proposal with some criteria and for LDS. And my work is actually work in progress. I'm still doing research. Some of the things I've mentioned today include the theory of mind and also the appearance of fluency, time sequencing, and abstract thought, right versus wrong, consequences, things like that. So understanding that this is still a work in progress, it doesn't mean that it's not accurate.
No further questions.
Thank you, Counsel.